And I want to welcome you to the Enterprise Integration Summit Expert Breakout Sessions. This is the session for Appian, and let me welcome back Jorge Sanchez, Director of Product Strategy at Appian. Jorge, welcome back.
Thank you.
You know, we're glad to have Jorge with us this morning. His main responsibilities include evaluating market and technology trends, research and development, product direction, and evolution. In fact, we're glad to tell you that Jorge was kind of a low-code expert before low-code was cool. He brings more than a decade of experience in BPM, mobile, case management platforms, all of which required integration as well. And he brings all that expertise together for us today in the session, The Power of Low-Code Integration. It's not enough to just simply integrate point to point. You need to get these applications and data to talk to each other and do it fast, flexibly, and with agility. So Jorge is going to take us through some really key ways to do that, including codeless integration, API extraction, and RPA-based solutions. And just a quick note, I see here that we're going to get a quick demo of some of these cool technologies from Appian, so fasten your seatbelt for that. Before I hand it to Jorge, just a quick reminder, you can download his slides. They're available right now under the viewing area. Click the link right there. You'll get them without extra registration. And we also have some other resources, supporting documents that will take you through some of the technologies and customer uses of these great solutions. And we'd love to make this interactive. So to connect with Jorge, just type in the submit a question box. So now, Jorge, with all that, let me turn it to you. You've got a lot to cover. Tell us about the power of low-code integration.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Yes, the power of low-code integration. Let's jump right into it. So software is in the world. Every company is an IT company. Every company needs to behave like an IT company. We've been hearing all this for years. And today, every company pretty much is a software company, and they've been for decades. What that means is that they've created an incredible collection of dozens, if not hundreds, of applications, and those applications change over time. They need to talk to each other over time, and whenever there's a new business challenge to be tackled, sometimes we need to add additional applications or functionality. And the difference this time is that siloed applications are no longer acceptable. At Appian, as a low-code provider, we've seen a lot of different use cases, but we focus primarily on three. When a company wants to use our platform, we usually come in with a collection of applications that already exist, and the use cases are typically in three different flavors. One is we build a new application for you. And when you build it in a low-code platform, of course, you build them a lot faster, but that doesn't mean that they're any less powerful, right? The second use case is when people want to extend the functionality of currently existing applications, that is, fill in the white space. Your CRM system might have some workflow capabilities, but not really business process or a thorough rules engine. They may not be able to orchestrate between applications as effectively as you'd like or integrate additional functionality. And the third use case, of course, is when we unify and we connect all of these applications in a way that we consolidate. So Appian becomes kind of the consolidator. You do interface consolidation, data consolidation, and you see all of this information through a single environment. And this is great because people no longer have to connect between systems and switch back and forth. However, in order to do this, you need a couple of things. One is an integrated platform itself. So at Appian, we try to provide all of the different functionality that you would need in order to deploy these applications from the process perspective, from the data perspective, security, interface, etc. And all of these need to be integrated and interconnected with one another. However, it's not enough to just have an integrated platform. You need a platform that can integrate with anything quickly and can be integrated with easily. And this is part of what we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about how we handle integrations with Appian. First, the basics. We provide a number of different connectors, support for standard protocols, and of course, platform use. When you go into Appian, you're going to see that we have a collection of connectors to some of the most commonly used platforms out there. What you see here is just a sample of them. We have many more. We even have a marketplace where many other companies, partners, and even us provide additional functionality that you can leverage out of the box. Also, for standard protocols, we support all the basics, right? So HTTP connections, RESTful, SOAP, JMS, SMTP, and of course, email. And you can use and leverage all of these integration points from any one of our objects in our platform. So you can call a RESTful interface from a process model. You can use a connector from within an expression or an interface. You can build a record of data, let's say a customer record, from sources such as SAP, Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics. You can build all of that into a record, and of course calling web APIs. So let's talk a little bit about those web APIs, because that is exactly how other systems can connect into Appian. Now, normally a lot of the platforms provide a library of already existing APIs. APIs that allow you to, for example, retrieve report information or retrieve record information and things like that. But at Appian, we do things a little bit differently. We allow the designers to decide how that web API is going to behave. This gives them full control on what, when, how, and whom can access them. And it's all done in a low-code setting. In fact, many of the cases supported can be fully implemented with a template and a wizard. For example, if you want to allow others to query records or data sources defined in Appian. And for those of you familiar, Appian allows you to configure records, which are around any specific business object or topic. And the data sources can come from multiple places. This is one area where we allow you to consolidate all that information. So when we talk about, for example, a customer record is usually never just coming from a single database table. It's coming from a number of data sources, a number of databases, a number of systems, and all of that give you that consolidated look. But when you create a web API that says, give me customer X, is going to give you all information that Appian already knows about it. Of course, you can also take action to start a process, update data, and all of this you can decide the who, what, when, and how through a template and a wizard without actually having to write code. Now, another important way to integrate is that it's not just about services. It's also about user experience. So with embedded interfaces, what happens when you already have a form and you want to expose it on your website without having to recreate it? Sure, you can create it and make the submit button trigger a web API, and that works, and that's what happens a lot of the cases. But when you have created that UI in Appian, you can actually embed it directly into your HTML website very, very easily. And you can actually apply branding controls and embed directly on your website. So it's a very useful way to integrate as well. So in kind of summary, right, when you integrate with Appian, you connect to other systems using connectors, smart services, and other platform features. Other systems connect to Appian via web APIs. And of course, you can leverage UIs that you have already created, like forms, dashboards, reports, records, and embed them into your own website. But there's more. What does it really mean to have a true low-code integration approach? Well, let me show you. Appian continues to invest heavily in low-code integration experiences. And with our new integration designer, leveraging all sorts of services has never been easier. Some examples are shown here, such as face detection, social media interactions, text detection, smart bulk control, customer records, and of course, all the typical use cases that we've seen. But how do we make it happen, and what does it look like? So next up, I'm going to show you an example dashboard that uses Microsoft Azure's face detection technology to analyze pictures. What it's going to show us is what is the gender, the estimated age, and emotions on that person's picture. So let me show the video. So here you can see a number of kids and adults. So when I click on the kid that is crying, it's telling me that it's a male about 8 years old and is pretty sad. The next one has a very surprised face. The next one is fairly neutral, 2.6 years. The next one is a female 5-year-old girl that's angry. Now here's where it gets interesting. With adults, even though we see a smiling person, it's telling me that it's mostly neutral, somewhat happy, some sadness in there. Then we can see additional faces here. Like, for example, the next one is not only majorly neutral, which is interesting, and it's also 35.5 years old. And finally, another face here that shows us additional details. Now, let's take a look at how this whole thing was configured using our integration designer. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the designer interface. Here's where you can create any objects for your applications, and I'm going to click on integration. I'm going to give my integration a name, and I'm going to go right into creating and editing it. Now, what you'll notice is that it's a very guided experience, right? So when you go to Azure, it's going to tell you, okay, you need to call this URL. all right? You need to specify a post to get, what type of method you're going to use to connect to it. And then you can define a number of additional things, like what parameters and headers and what is the body, if any, is appropriate for this specific API. So you don't need to worry about coding any of this information. So I'm going to add the parameters, like what are the facial attributes that I care about. The values are going to be, I care about age, gender, and emotion. And the headers, for example, you can define additional attributes. In this case, we can define how we're going to be authenticating with this service, right? So the subscription key, for example. And I can use an expression to reference a value from a constant, so I don't have to specify the value in clear text. Instead, I use an encrypted constant like you see me doing right here. And then you can define what the body is going to look like. Now, we support all those, the basic ones, so JSON, XML, text. But we can also do a custom one if you wanted to, and if the use case required it. But in this case, it's going to be JSON. So the only thing this integration requires is for me to give the URL of a picture. And I can see I'm passing the picture of Jacob Rank, and I see all the details from the call immediately. So when I click test, this is showing me exactly what is happening, but oftentimes you don't want to just hard code the link. You want to parameterize it. So what I want to make sure this integration takes is the ability to take the URL as a parameter, and I'm going to replace that right here. So I'm just going to copy the URL here as the parameter, and I'm going to make a reference to the rule input image URL. So when I test again, I get a different request ID, and I can see that this is a male, 33.7 years old, with some anger and contempt. And when I switch to another picture, I can see the additional details there. If I take out age and I test again, then the age factor goes away and I can no longer see it. So it's a very simple way for me to create this integration rule, save it, and now I can use it from anywhere I want within my application. So feature highlights, right? So when we talk about integrations in Appian, we're talking about a low-code integration design. Yes, you can still code if you wanted to. There's a way to create plugins and leverage existing libraries if you have them. But the ability to deliver on that low-code promise is because of features like these ones. Reusable integrations. Once you create this object, you can reuse it anywhere, in a dashboard, in a process model, in an expression. You can also enter the credentials directly in the designer or leverage our secure credential store. You can very quickly test and get feedback and detailed guidance on what to do with these integrations as you test them. And of course, view the request and response diagnostics. So now integrating with services just got a lot easier. What you see on the screen are a few logos of some of the services that we can very easily integrate with without writing a single line of code. And this, of course, is on top of the standard protocols that we already support. Now, I also want to talk about recent partnership that we had with MuleSoft and talk about API-led connectivity with them. The reason it's important is because of what we talked about earlier, about that use case where we have dozens or hundreds of connections, in many cases done with point-to-point. So I bet that a lot of you, or some of you at least, have worked or seen systems that look a little bit like that. When you have a system with many point-to-point connections. And usually this is great, you know, everything's working fine until the moment where you need to replace one of those systems. So what happens when you say, okay, we're now going to renew Siebel, so we're going to switch over to Salesforce. How are you going to handle all the different processes and apps that are currently hooked into Siebel? How much time is it going to take you to make each and every one of those updates and every one of those business rules and every one of those different web APIs and replace them with a new way to connect to Salesforce? How much money is it going to cost? And the worst is that since we are taking all of that information and using it in multiple systems, there might be zero additional benefit to the business, right? So how do you handle that? Well, thankfully, there's a better way. And this is why we decided to partner with MuleSoft, because they allow you to abstract the whole concept of API management. So with MuleSoft, what you're allowed to do is no system talks directly to one another. In this case, Appian would call what MuleSoft calls an experience API. So let's say that I have one that calls customers. So I say, I want to retrieve information about my customer, and another one that retrieves information about orders, which, by the way, are related to customers. So that's what they call a process API, a separate level of abstraction. And you can define these APIs using your own terminology. And when the time comes, a customer is actually sourced from multiple systems and what they call system APIs with this mythical customer, right? So the information that it's going to give you all the details about a customer might actually be coming from SAP, Salesforce, MySQL. So these systems APIs are the ones that you would replace whenever you need to do that. And this would facilitate application integration and design. And more importantly, when you connect these applications here, you do not disrupt the behavior of any single one of them. So whenever you need to replace a system, no problem. You only have to change the API you build with Mule to change, for example, the connection from Salesforce to Siebel or vice versa. But everything else behaves as you would expect. None of the Appian applications you have created need to be changed, and this integration and partnership makes it even easier thanks to all that built-in functionality that we have. Now, I also want to talk about the legacy systems. It's all great when you can connect to systems that have APIs. Point-to-point might not be ideal, but in some cases we have to. But what happens when you need to integrate with legacy systems? And I'm talking about the ones with green screens, the ones that can't even spell API. Many organizations are stuck with a portfolio of legacy systems or very complex business processes, and it slows them down. So what we've done is we've actually created a new product offering and partnership with Blue Prism, and we call it Appian RPA with Blue Prism. It's a new product that combines the best of our low-code platform and BPM with Blue Prism's best-in-class RPA capabilities to provide comprehensive enterprise automation. So what we're trying to do is give you the best of both worlds, right? Make sure that you can automate those and integrate even with those systems that are not meant to be integrated with, and make sure that you can handle those situations where those automations and those bots fail and how you manage those exceptions. So those are essentially the two key use cases that we typically come across when we talk about robotic process automation. From the one hand, you want to use Blue Prism's technology to integrate with legacy systems that offer no integration points. So if we look at this process depiction we have right here, you might get a request to update a customer. But when you update a customer, you're never updating just one system. You might be updating 5. And out of those 5, maybe 2 are legacy systems. So within the process, Appian can handle the integration and the updates from those 3 systems that we can integrate with and trigger the bots that would update legacy system A and legacy system B and have that be managed. And you get all the information in real time about what the bots are doing, how they're doing it, etc. Now, other use cases is where you already have, let's say, scheduled bots doing work day in and day out. They're going to take information from one screen, copy paste it into another screen, clear that information from there, put it into another screen, click save, so on and so forth, and they're going to repeat that over and over and over again. But sometimes there are exceptions. Sometimes the information that it was expecting to copy was empty, or sometimes it was too long. So what happens in those situations? That's where the whole 360-degree integration comes into play, because a bot can actually trigger an action in Appian so that Appian can handle the exception management and bring a human to play in these types of situations. So I want to talk a little bit about one use case for one of our customers. They're called Aviva. They are an insurance company from the UK, and they're actually the result of mergers and acquisitions over the course of years. And because of that, they had over 22 systems, legacy systems, that they were consolidated. They reduced call center costs over 40%. They were able to deliver it 9 times faster. But it's incredible, right? Before Appian, they measured performance of the contact center speed with the speed with which the call was executed, rather than the whole case as a whole. And they found that customers would call in with the same demand on an average of 3 times. Despite these 3 calls, a lot of the time the information provided was wrong. So they had a lot of pressure to make sure that they had all the information they needed at the time that they needed. And furthermore, a lot of the times the agents had to interact with multiple systems because they were not able to go from the customer experience center and update something, like for example, creating a ticket or updating inventory or defining a specific quote without touching those legacy systems. So with a combination of RPA and Appian, they were able to reduce by 40%, like I mentioned before, these service requests and satisfy those customer requests 9 times faster. So it's a really, really interesting use case. To find out more details, I would encourage all of you to take a look at the full story, Delivering Transformative Business Apps with AI, RPA, and Low Code. Here's the link, and you can find all the details you want by following it. Now, this concludes the presentation. I thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'll turn it over back to Vance for any questions we might have from the audience.
Jorge, really great, provocative look at the convergence between the app development, the low-code mantra that we're all looking at these days, and the need for more and more intelligent integration. A really great session.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You know, Jorge, just to set the table, you have so many different capabilities that Appian is bringing along, in addition to your growing ecosystem for low-code integration. I wonder if you could kind of put in context Appian's view of the world and how you fit in.
Absolutely. We have a very holistic view of the world from that perspective. We understand that when customers want to integrate with a system, they're doing it for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it's consolidation, sometimes it's to avoid connecting to multiple places, sometimes it's to empower or augment the solutions that they have. That is why we see everything very holistically. From that perspective, however, what you might remember when I talked about web APIs, that really enables what many call backend as a service, right? Where you can have a number of different APIs available to use from other systems and have Appian work in some instances as a headless provider of those rules. In other instances, you want to actually ask the question, why are you integrating with these 5 systems? And it turns out that the reason they're doing it is because they need information from all of those systems to make a decision. Furthermore, when you have all of that information, you may want to, for example, train a machine learning model on it. So all of that are really important use cases, and we need to be able to handle pretty much everything. Every time we think, okay, we finally cracked how this integration is going to work, now we're done, it's never the case. So Appian has been a platform that's been nothing if not an example of evolution. So we started as a BPM platform. We started expanding more into case management. Now we have a whole application platform that allows you to build applications in low code, integrate with everything. I would say it's a very holistic perspective. We have partnered with a number of different companies. You heard me talk about MuleSoft. We've also integrated with Prism, and we have a laundry list of additional both technical and services-based partnerships in order to empower and basically support all of these use cases.
Fantastic, fantastic. You know, you mentioned that Appian started in the BPM world and has pivoted now to become a pretty well-known low-code app platform. Here's a question that kind of looks at the app dimension of integration. And it says, we're looking to explore technologies to help us build disruptive apps like Uber. And we think that low code and certainly simplified integration would help. Does Appian have any go-to-market that would help us achieve this goal?
Yeah, absolutely. So Appian does have the ability to create mobile applications. Any application that you create is automatically a mobile application. However, in many cases, our customers want to have a lot of control, pixel-perfect control of how the application looks and feel. But where Appian comes to play is what I mentioned before with the mobile backend application as a service. What happens next is the big part. So just because you created a ticket or you requested a car through an application and there's a follow-up, there's always something happening in the back, and there's always something happening back at headquarters. So the ability to create all of these web APIs to retrieve the information no matter where the disruptive mobile application was created is a very powerful concept. Why would you recreate all of those business rules, all of those predictive analytics, all of those reports, if you can just retrieve them with a simple web API? So that's the power of the integration play, right? You don't have to always create an application that's customer facing on Appian. You certainly can, but if you already have it and you want to empower it, you want to augment its functionality through the power of Appian low-code integrations, you can certainly do that. And the beauty is that through our web APIs, you can access any part of our platform, whether it's a process, a business rule, a report, data about a customer, data about a specific product. You can do that.
Oh, fantastic. Here's a couple of questions that go to the under the covers, how do you do it? Jorge, you spent quite some time talking about what Appian calls the integration object. And the question says, what happens after an integration object is created? How is it used? And perhaps even put us through the thinking behind how you would guide folks to identify an integration object and then what down the line happens to that object.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Appian's designer world, an application is a collection of objects that have a common purpose. You might have processes, you may have decision rules, you may have business rules, query rules, and of course, integration objects. Now, you can integrate and use a lot of different components or Lego blocks to build these applications, but the ones that I mentioned are first level application objects. And the beauty of those is that they can be referenced and reused anywhere in our product. So once you have created an integration object, it can be used within a process, for example, in the second step, to make a decision. So let's say that you're trying to determine the creditworthiness of a customer before you approve or reject that transaction in a process. You can call that integration to retrieve, say, the real-time FICO score. You can retrieve machine learning prediction model to authenticate or to predict how the customer is going to churn or if they're going to pay on time. So all of these can be used from just about anywhere. You can use it in a report, you can use it in a dashboard. That's the power of having created an integration, not just like an expression, which is what used to happen before, but rather a first-class object in one of your applications. Appian has very comprehensive impact analysis capabilities. So you can always click, for example, select a specific object and understand which other objects are impacted, how many other objects are referencing it, where, how, if I want to make a change to my integration. So go back to the example of, let's say that you have a situation of point-to-point connections everywhere. Answering that question, right? Do you know how many processes are currently using this integration? Well, with Appian, that's a very easy question to answer because all you do is you select it and you perform an impact analysis on its dependence, and it tells you exactly all of the objects and where and how. And if you make the change in that one place, it'll automatically be changed in all of those references as well. However, when that situation starts escalating, that's where a lot of customers want to have more control of API management, and that's why we have in partnerships with MuleSoft to handle some of those cases as well.
Fantastic. That's a great picture that you paint, Jorge, to put that in the user context. Here's another trend that you mentioned in your session that got some attention, the idea of the Robotic Process Automation, or RPA. And the question says, we've been considering using RPA for many of our existing processes, but we're a bit concerned about how it can handle its exceptions. How does Appian manage requests from RPA bots that encounter exceptions?
So part of what we did is we wanted to make sure that we have a full bi-directional integration, right? So that it's important for Appian to be able to trigger bots and for Appian to query the status of the bots and the quality of the work that the bots are doing. But it's also very important for those bots to be able to query and trigger actions and launch events on Appian. So a very typical example is the one I mentioned, and the one that you're talking about is exception management. As we automate more and more, humans are going to be involved in the more specialized areas that require more specialized knowledge. So, and this is something that happens all the time. So, for example, I don't know if you're aware of this, but when you fly on a commercial aircraft, pilots usually only fly for about 7 minutes. The rest of the time is automated. They basically do the takeoff and the landing, right? And that is exactly what's happening in a lot of these automation exercises. Bots and automation are taking over not the full occupation, not the full work, but part of it. And humans have to focus more and they have to collaborate. So there's another layer of collaboration between bots and humans that are going to enable the full spectrum of the application and handle all those different use cases. So what we do is essentially empower, and we made the connection from the RPA system to be able to trigger these processes to collaborate and enable that collaboration between bots and our human workers as well. So when we're talking about the full circle, right, Appian being able to trigger bots and then bots being able to trigger Appian events from the event management perspective, it's really part of the reason why this was such a successful story with Aviva, right? Not only do they wanted to manage what was happening, but oftentimes you have all these bots working, but you don't see what they're doing, how they're doing it, when they're failing, how they're failing, right? So oftentimes bot would just stop. Then you would have a bot that would stop while trying to update information about a customer or while trying to send that additional mail and things like that, and people who didn't know what to do. So when they dug into it, they identified a number of different situations where a human needed to be involved, a bot needed to be restarted, somebody needed to take over and make a decision. So imagine you thinking that, oh yeah, everything is happening according to plan, but then that email was never sent or that additional offer was never processed. That's a loss to the business, right? So being able to identify that and monitor what is happening to the bots, and Appian, either because of something failing, trigger an event, or programming the bot to identify that something might not be as expected, that the outcome might not be as expected, and being able to trigger a workflow or trigger a process in order to handle it and make sure that nothing gets stuck, it's of great value to companies like this ones, especially those that manage millions of requests, sometimes even per day.
That's a great way to explain it, Jorge, because the idea that Appian is a mediation or an integration capability between how the bot thinks and how humans think and the work they do to make the customer happy, that's a really important kind of dimension to integration that I think we'll probably see in the future. Great story there.
Thank you.
Jorge, I see time is just about up, but one last dimension of integration that comes up in the questions, a very intriguing one, and this goes to the issue of how Appian can integrate with traditional technologies and tools that enterprises already have on-premise. And the question says, can I use my own integration libraries or integration tools with Appian? And if so, how could I extend the functionality?
Yes, you can integrate with your integration. So there's multiple places. If you already have an API management console, then you simply plug it with Appian. But in some cases, you might already have built a way that you feel comfortable with that already creates a ticket, manages this in one system, handles that in another system, and you just want to leverage that. And to do that, Appian supports what we call plugins, and we use the OSGI framework for that. And a plugin is a hot deployable component that leverages your code as a reusable component. So for example, you can create an additional what we call smart service, which is something you drag into the process modeler that executes something like, for example, update record. So instead of dragging three different things, something that updates record A for customer, updates system B for the customer, and updates system C, you might do it all in a single step leveraging that plugin. If you wanted to also do it on an expression, right, you want to retrieve information, but instead of calling three integration objects, you already have your library with all of them in a single location, you can create a plugin for that as well. So Appian is also meant to be expanded upon. So we allow that through plugins and through all of the integration objects.
Jorge, this has been such a great session talking about integration across so many different dimensions, apps and hybrid environments and processes, and now even my own internal systems. I wonder if you could give us a sense of how folks could take the next step forward and maybe go hands-on with any of these capabilities.
So yeah, I would encourage every one of you to take a look at our platform. You can go to our website at www.appian.com and start a new trial. It gives you 30 days for unrestricted access to our environment. You can also find all of our documentation, training videos, and things like that that would allow you to give kind of a trial by fire, right? Start learning, start experimenting with all of our integration functionality. And please definitely reach out to our support department if you have any questions or follow-ups.
Fantastic. Jorge Sanchez, Director of Product Strategy at Appian, thanks very much for a really eye-opening session about the continuing evolution and delivery of low-code solutions now for integration, and especially that can be applied to so many different use cases. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And as we love to do here at the Enterprise Integration Summit, Jorge mentioned several resources of which we can post right here in the breakout room. They're available without any extra registration, but so many more resources are available. We've created a slide here that'll give you one-click access. Just download the PDF slides from Jorge's session. These links will be live. Thanks, everyone.